to order James City County Wetlands Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activity so as to prevent their depletion. Roll call, please. Ms. Bierman.
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Rodley?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Apperson?
Here.
And Mr. Dunn.
Here.
First order of business tonight is to elect a chair of this committee. We have nominations, please, for this position.
I'd like to nominate Billy.
I second that.
I'll second it. Looks like it's unanimous.
Something I don't know is going on here, but thank you. It's an honor. Thank you. We shall have a roll call on the vote, please. Ms. Bierman?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll try to do my best for you. Did everyone have a chance to check the minutes? Any corrections, additions?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, yes.
Since the vice chair position is now vacant, we need to elect the
I
vice
want to
chair,
wait to the end of
please.
the meeting for that? Okay. Nominations for vice chair, please.
Mr. Dunn?
I'd be honored.
I second that.
Ready to vote?
Okay, Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn.
Yes.
Congratulations, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Now we'll get to the minutes. Corrections, additions? If not, the stand approved as read. Moving on to public hearings, case WJPA 20005, Neckerland Road temporary sandbag revetment. Mr. Long is the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James City County Watershed Planner, here to present WJPA 20-005. Ms. Dorothy Geyer of the National Park Service has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Ms. Kim Hall of the Colonial National Historic Park to construct 2 sections of sandbag revetments on property located at 541 Neckerland Road, otherwise known as the Colonial Parkway within the College Creek watershed, and to be more specific, just west of the College Creek bridge and parking lot located off the James River. The eastern part of this project is adjacent to the parking lot, and this section is experiencing erosion that is threatening the structural stability of the parking lot. The western part of this project is approximately 500 feet away and exhibits increased erosion and incision of the slope. This portion of the Colonial Parkway exhibits increased erosion due to multiple large canopy trees that have fallen into the river and along the beach. The applicant is proposing to construct 382 linear feet of sandbag revetments in order to armor the bank from future erosion. The revetments are proposed to be constructed in 2 separate places along the shoreline, and this site will be accessed from both barge and the uplands, with no vegetated impacts proposed within the construction of this project. The Commonwealth of Virginia is committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetlands acreage and function in the regulatory programs. In order for the proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for the wetlands loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated in the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature, and the proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. If the proposed project cannot meet one or more of the above criteria, the project must be denied or must occur in areas outside of the wetlands. Should it satisfy all 3 of the criteria, however, compensation for the wetland loss is required. The sequence of acceptable mitigation options should be as follows: on-site, off-site within the same watershed mitigation banks in the same watershed, or a payment in lieu of fee. If compensation is required, it should be a condition of this permit. Staff's view of this application is that it meets all 3 criteria presented above and recommends approval of this proposal. Should the board also find the permit request meets all 3 of the criteria above, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the permit approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits required for this project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance, and receive all required approvals and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. And that this wetlands permit for this project shall expire on May 13th, 2021, if construction has not begun, with written requests for an extension submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 1st, 2021, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has at this time. Actually, I'm sorry, if you would please divert your attention to the screen. We have further presentation material. As you can see above, that's the aerial, the 2019 aerial of the project, and how the floodplain affects it. The above picture is the 1990 aerial, so you can see the extent of the erosion over the past 20 or so years, 30 years. Floodplain as it affects this property, and the topography. As it sits right now, it's a fairly steep bank with clear signs of incision and erosion affecting structural stability and safety along the beachway. The red portion above is the project locations. Again, there are two separate locations, but in general, this is the project location. Location 1 above shows the first area in question. Structural stability of the parking lot that's shown above is the reason for the revetments in this area. A cross section of the sandbag revetments is listed above. And location 2, a couple hundred feet down the beach of the original, of the original location. Some site photographs of location 1, as you can see, just above the incision and the erosion, trucks parked in the parking lot. Moving down the beach, showing the erosion and the extent, you can see the downed trees, both further and inhibiting erosion. And as we grow closer towards the extent of location 2, and coming back down the beach, that would be the last portion. This is a small breakwater system that is acting as a erosion prevention method currently at that portion. Again, staff does recommend approval of this project, given that the applicant obtain all other necessary local, state, and federal permits required, that the development activities located in the special flood hazard area comply with Article 6, Division 3 of the floodplain area regulations, and this permit request become null and void if construction has not begun by May 13th, 2021, with written request for extension submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 1st, 2021. Now I'd be happy to take any questions the board has.
Temporary, what does that mean? How temporary is this going to be? It looks to me like it's going to be there a long time. I mean,
Mr. Chair, I can answer that question. The Park Service does have the intent to put in breakwater structures in the future. It's funding dependent. The two locations they've chosen for this project, the first one protects the parking lot, and there is a structure on the bluff in the location of the second breakwater or revetment. That's why they chose those two specific locations.
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
What is going to be done to the erosion on the banks? Is anything at all, or are you just doing the sandbag revetment?
Currently, it's just the sandbags, just armoring the bank.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman, have they spoken to anybody regarding the design approach that they're using? I have no issue with the project per se, it's just the height of the structure seems rather short.
I do know they consulted the Army Corps of Engineers to provide the drawings and engineering. Otherwise, that is the extent of my knowledge on who they've consulted.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Long. At this time, we'll open the public hearings. Anyone here wish to speak to this application? And please come forward. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Discussion from the board.
I don't have any problems with it.
No problems. Are we ready to vote?
Mr.
Motion?
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve or adopt the resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board Case WJPA 200-0005 at 541 Neckaland Road.
Chairman?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Gusman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Moving on, according to my itinerary here, the next public hearing is WJPA 20008, 1010 Kingsmill Road, floating pier for Mr. Wilson.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson, Senior Watershed Planner, here to present case WJPA 20-0008, the Williamsburg Sailing Club and their proposal at the Kingsmill Marina. Mr. John Wandling of the Williamsburg Sailing Foundation has applied for a wetlands permit to construct a floating dock on property located at 1010 Kingsmill Road in the Kingsmill Resort Marina within the James River watershed. Williamsburg Sailing Foundation does lease a slip at the Kingsmill Marina where there's an existing 8-foot by 50-foot floating dock. The applicant proposes an additional 8-foot by 35-foot floating dock. There are no vegetated wetlands impacts associated with the proposed construction, but it must come before the board because the application is considered commercial in nature. As published in the Virginia Register, the revised wetland mitigation compensation policy and supplemental guidelines, Virginia is committed to achieve no net loss in tidal wetland, and in order for the project, I'm sorry, I'm not used to doing it this way. In order for a proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for the wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, be incorporated into the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature. The proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. Staff's reviewed the application and finds that this project does meet all 3 of those criteria as outlined. As stated previously, there are no vegetated wetland impacts, thus no mitigation is required. According to the site plan submitted, the existing dock out there, and they want to add on an 8 by 35 foot floating section immediately adjacent to it. Existing floating pier that's out there shot of that. In the permit conditions, staff does recommend approval. The applicant obtain any other necessary state, local, federal permits as required, that any development located in the special flood hazard area comply with Article 6, Division 3 of the floodplain area regulations of the county, that a site plan will be required to be submitted to the planning division due to the commercial nature of the marina. The wetlands permit shall expire on May 13, 2021. If construction is not begun, and that if an extension of the permit is needed, it be submitted to our office no later than April 1st, 2021, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Wilson. At this time, we'll open the public hearings. Anyone here wish to speak to this application? Seeing no one come forward, we'll close the public hearing. Discussion from the board. How do you feel?
Straightforward.
You ready to vote? Motion?
I'll make a motion. Mr. Chairman, motion to adopt the resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board case in WJPA 20-008 at 1010 Kings Mill Road.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Board considerations, we have a presentation.
Good evening, gentlemen. Before you is a resolution to adopt a remote participation policy for the Wetlands Board. Given the current health crisis, staff thought it would be appropriate for the board to adopt this policy in the event a board member wishes to participate remotely. This policy is the same as policies adopted by the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission. There is a typo in the resolution in front of you. Any reference to the Board of Supervisors should actually be the Wetlands Board. So FOIA requires that a quorum of the board still be present, but up to 2 members may participate remotely for a personal reason or for a temporary disability or a medical condition upon notification to the chair. This policy conforms with FOIA requirements, and if adopted, the policy will be available to you after the end of the pandemic. I should note that should the board need to conduct any meetings where the entire board participates remotely, this policy wouldn't apply, but we would follow the requirements outlined in the continuity of government ordinance that the Board of Supervisors adopted last month. So this is simply a policy that will carry on into the future should any board member wish to participate remotely. Staff recommends approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Questions here? We'll vote on this now. Are you ready? Roll call.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Michael O'Brien, who was recently appointed to this board by the Board of Supervisors. He is taking Mr. John Hughes' place. Mr. Hughes' term on this board expired March 31st. We'll be doing a presentation at the June meeting for Mr. Hughes.
Can I ask you about that? Good, thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome. Questions that we were going to ask about the new directions from the General Assembly. Should we wait and do that after the Chesapeake Bay meeting, or would you want to do that now?
I would prefer you do it now, Mr. Chair.
I had a chance to read the new guidance from the General Assembly that Mike sent us, and I had a couple questions, and if I have questions, I think maybe some other folks have questions too. And maybe the easiest way to handle this, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm open for suggestions. I would suggest we make a list of questions and give them to Mike, and then give him time to research and come back with the best answer at the time. If that meets everybody's approval, I'll be responsible for accumulating the questions and getting them to him if you'll get to me the questions that you have. I don't want to take time right now while the public is here and everyone to talk this over. We can just get our questions to him and then get them back later when he has an answer. Is that okay with, meet your approval? Does that meet your approval, sir?
Certainly. I do, just for clarification's sake, I just want to briefly describe the legislation you're talking about. It was House Bill, I believe, 776, and it authorized or made mandatory living shorelines as an approach to shoreline management throughout the Commonwealth. There's some things that VMRC needs to do. First, they need to clarify some language, and I believe they're going to be putting forth a work group to work on that from various localities. And Mr. Rodley, did I summarize that succinctly enough?
So it is now the policy of the Commonwealth that living shorelines are the preferred method for shoreline stabilization, effective July 1st.
Effective July 1st.
And so in making our motions after July 1st, there will have to be some statements in our motions or discussion with regard to why or why not a living shoreline is not the preferred approach. The guidelines that are being produced by VMRC in collaboration with VIMS and others will provide guidance to us on how we evaluate and render those decisions. But it's clear that the intent is for us to give preference to living shorelines.
That's the way I read it, too. Anyone else have anything to say? If not, a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Meeting is adjourned.
I'd like to call to order the May 13th meeting of the Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Rodley?
Here.
Mr. Guessman?
Here.
Mr. Apperson?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
Okay, first order of business, minutes from the March 11th meeting. Any problems with that? Minutes stand approved. Next order of business are public hearings. Our first case, CBPA 20-009 at 108 Godspeed Lane.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 20-0009. Mr. Michael Harand of the Witt Corporation has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. David Chin for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a deck on property located at 108 Godspeed Lane within the Powhatan Shores subdivision and the Powhatan Creek watershed. The vicinity map above showing the proposed location and the watersheds listed. Parcel was platted in 1975 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 0.48 acres, of which 60% is located within the RPA. Aerial photograph above showing the project location and the flat topography of the general area, the resource coming from the canal adjacent to the property, and the resource protection area as it affects this property, again, covering about 60% of the parcel. The applicant is proposing to construct a 730 square foot deck in order to accommodate for future accessibility and includes a ramp to access the proposed upper deck from the proposed lower deck. A hot tub area is also included with the proposed lower deck. There is an existing 250 square foot deck on property that the applicant intends to remove as part of this project, equating to a total of 480 square feet of new impervious surface associated with this project proposal. This site plan above demonstrates the project that was just described with the resource protection area outlined in red, the proposed new deck in yellow, and the existing deck that is planned to be replaced in red. During the review process for this proposal, staff conversed with the applicant if there was a possibility to decrease the amount of additional impervious surface. However, the applicant has expressed that the proposed plan is the minimum necessary to afford relief, in their opinion. Required mitigation for this amount of new impervious surface equates to the plantings of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. The applicant has proposed the plantings of 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of this deck. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the deck is accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The board may grant the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance of the James City County Code, to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming to related adjacent parcels. And reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it does meet all 5 of the conditions as presented above. Should the board also find the exception request meet all 5 of the conditions above, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated in the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for this project. This includes the James City County Land Disturbance Permit, any required surety, and approved erosion and sediment control plan. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. A surety of $1,000 be paid in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County's Attorney's Office. And this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by May 13th, 2021, with written request for an extension to this exception be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 1st, 2021, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Above, I have some site photographs, in addition to a 3-dimensional site plan that the applicant has provided to us. Again, you can see the ADA accessible ramps going from the ground to the lower deck and then up to the higher deck. Above you can see the existing deck that plans to be replaced. From the side of the house, looking from what would be the lower deck up into the higher deck. This area would be the lower deck, the ADA ramp, and the hot tub area. Again, the existing deck that plans to be replaced with the seating area. And viewing from the opposite direction, so from the higher deck down to the lower deck. Again, should the board wish to approve this exception request, all necessary local, state, and federal permits will be required. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 of the James City County Floodplain Area Regulations. That a surety of $1,000 to ensure the plantings of mitigation is required. Mitigation of 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs as provided by the applicant. And this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by May 13th, 2021, with written request for extension submitted no later than April 1st, 2021. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have at this time.
Go back to the slide that shows the overhead there, the basic plan first. I'm curious about how much of the construction is a ramp. It looks, okay, that, back up, go ahead one now.
Go ahead, one. Yes, sir.
That right there, okay. Looks to me like a great deal of this construction is simply ADA ramps.
Yes, sir, that is correct. The majority of the existing house is protruding. Just adjacent to that will be completely all ramps.
Thank you.
I'd like to say I went out and looked at the piece of property too, and looking at the setback, 50-foot encroachment, seemed like it kind of favored this house more than anybody else, because it seemed like and it swung in this area is, and ramps for the handicap, they had to more or less do it this way to make this thing work. I couldn't see myself jeopardizing having that available to the family for wheelchair accessibility. It's really so. Application. Accepting it.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to address the board?
Chairman, Honorable Board, thank you for this opportunity to present. Thank you for the courtesies of presenting this. I just had one question. I'd love to adhere to the recommended mitigation and instead of going excessive. I'm a good construction guy. I'm a terrible green thumb, and I've tried before to plant many times, and they're tough getting them to take. We'll do our best, but if it's required to go with one tree and 2 understory trees and 3 shrubs, I know that's doable. I can get them to live. I don't know if I could double it. Is that permittable?
You don't think you can get 2 trees in, or?
I have, but last time I bought them from Cook's, and boy, we returned them twice because they wouldn't take, the soil is bad, but I do my best and we get them to go, but I'd hate to say I'm gonna do double when I'm only required to do one of the units. I wanna keep my word.
Let's see, so one tree would still meet the guidelines. Board have any problems with that? Okay, we can change it to 1 tree. It would still meet the guidelines. All right,
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chin, just want to make sure I'm clear on that. You are proposing one planting unit, which is 1 canopy, 2 understory, and 3 shrubs.
Yes, as required, as stated here, versus,
Okay.
okay. All right, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Is the board okay with that change to 1 canopy tree? It still meets the minimum requirements. Any discussion from the board? Okay, would someone like to make a motion?
Make a motion.
Excuse me, go ahead.
I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for the Chesapeake Bay case CBPA 20-0009 at 108 Godspeed Lane.
We have a roll call?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
No.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
No.
The motion carries, exception is granted. Next case is CBPA 20-0011, 204 Riverview Plantation Drive.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 20-0011. Mr. Curtis Limley has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for the encroachments into the RPA buffer for the expansion of a bathroom on property located at 204 Riverview Plantation Drive within the Riverview Plantation subdivision and Skimino Creek watershed. The vicinity map above showing the general location in the surrounding area being the Riverview Plantation. This parcel was platted in 1963 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size of this property is 0.47 acres, of which 55% is located within the RPA. Topography on the lot generally slopes back towards the tail end of the property and is flat approximately where the house is. Again, resource protection area as it affects this portion of the lot. It encroaches up into the house and the general vicinity of which this project proposal comes into play with. The applicant is proposing to expand a bathroom on a currently existing single-family dwelling located on this property. The expansion equals a total of 228 square feet of additional impervious surface, and require mitigation for this amount of impervious surface within the RPA equates to 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs. A mitigation surety will be required in the amount of $250 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the plantings of this mitigation. The site plan above does show this, this proposed expansion with the resource protection area as it affects this property highlighted in red, and the proposed expansion here in yellow. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the bathroom expansion. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14, and should be heard by the board because the construction expands on a currently existing structure and encroaches further into the resource protection area. The board may grant exceptions to sections 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code, to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. This exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed with all which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it does meet all 5 of the conditions as presented above and recommends approval of this exception request. Should the board also find that the exception request meets all 5 of the conditions above, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for this project. The plantings of 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs shall be required as mitigation. A surety of $250 is to be paid in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. And that this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by May 13th, 2021, with written request for an extension to this permit, exception request be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 1st, 2021, 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Above, I have some site photographs from this parcel. General area of the expansion in the garden. Located here, and from the side, a view of this. Again, should the board wish to approve this proposal, all the necessary local, state, and federal permits shall be required. The plantings of 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs to ensure as mitigation, with a surety of $250 to ensure these plantings be required, and that this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by May 13th, 2021, with written request for extension submitted no later than April 1st, 2021. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has.
Any questions for staff?
Could you go back to the last photo? That concrete patio right there, is that a concrete patio?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Is that gonna remain in its entirety, or is part of that gonna come up?
It's my understanding that that will not remain. However, I will let the applicant
I
formally
was just
address
wondering if
that.
that changed the size of the impervious area.
Yes, I think the applicant would best answer that.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward to address the board? Just state your name for the record.
Curtis Lumley.
204 Riverview Plantation. Yes, the concrete will be out of there. The reason coming 19, I had to leave room for the HVAC, the power. Power company coming in, they're gonna have to, the line come behind the house. And we're gonna have to go to the driveway, come in, then put a new meter off, a foot off the corner of the house with a, quick on it.
Any other questions for the applicant?
So one of the concerns that I routinely express for encroachment into the RPA is treating stormwater runoff. And I noticed you have, in this picture anyway, your gutter just kind of outfalls down onto the ground and then sheet flows. Have you noticed any erosion there, or is your land?
My land is nice. You got about, I think it's 50 feet to the hill, down to the water, and I'm full of trees.
You're not seeing any real erosion or anything of that nature?
Not at all. I maintain all turf anyway out in county.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I don't see any particular issues with this.
Would someone like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the board vote to adopt CBA 20-0011-204 Riverview Plantation Drive, House Edition.
Okay, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Motion carries. The exception is granted. Next case is CBPA 20-0027, 2 Staples Road.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson here to present case CBPA 20-0027, 2 Staples Road. Song Kukang and Haisung Lim Kang. Mr. Matthew Roth of Roth Environmental has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of the Kangs for encroachments into the RPA buffer for construction of a retaining wall and patio on property located at 2 Staples Mill. How to work this within the Kings Mill subdivision. Subject property is located here in the blue. Project location will be in the rear left of the property. Existing topography of the site does slope fairly significantly to a steep ravine in the rear of the property that forms the rear property line, the center of the channel. RPA as it affects the property affects approximately 72% of the property. And this property was platted in 1974 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay ordinance. From the submitted site plan, we have the 50-foot RPA and the 100-foot RPA, proposed retaining wall, proposed patio. Total lot size for this property is 0.85 acres, of which 72% is within the RPA. The applicants are proposing the construction of a 50-foot retaining wall within the seaward RPA in order to address erosion issues that the owners have been experiencing. Additionally, the applicants are proposing the construction of a 210 square foot patio within the landward 50-foot RPA in order to accommodate a fire pit. Along with the addition of the proposed impervious surfaces, the applicants have agreed to remove 20 square feet of a wooden timber wall that currently surrounds a garden area. Total new impacts to the RPA equal 240 square feet. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious cover within the RPA equates to the planting of 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs. The mitigation mitigation surety for this would be in the amount of $250 in a form acceptable to the county attorney's office. Staff's evaluated the application and the exception request and has determined that this application should be heard before the board because the construction of the retaining wall and the patio are considered accessory structures. The board may grant exceptions to Section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it does meet all 5 of those conditions as presented above and recommends approval of the exception request. Should the board also find that the exception request meets all 5 of the conditions above, we suggest the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The planting of 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs. A surety of $250 be in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the county attorney's office. That the exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by May 13, 2021, and that written request for an extension to the exception shall be submitted to our office no later than April 1st, 2021. Here are some site photographs, location of the proposed patio in that turf area. Proposed retaining wall. See that turfed area is sloping, and there's some erosion coming from the left to the right. Another view of that. And the proposed 20 square feet of timbers that would be removed. Again, staff's recommendation is approval with these conditions that all other permits, local, federal, state, are required. Planting of 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs. A surety of $250 to guarantee the mitigation. That the exception request become null and void 1 year from tonight, May 13th, 2021, and a written request be submitted no later than April 1st, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
Wilson, can you address the severity of the erosion that you witnessed?
I would defer that question to Mr. Roth, who's here on behalf of his clients.
Thank
Okay. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant or the applicant's representative like to address the board?
I like to talk with my hands, and I'm going to have to hold a folder, so I may have a speech impediment. I'm Matt Roth, president of Roth Environmental, 700 Prescott Circle, Newport News, Virginia. I'm here this evening to present on behalf of the Kangs at 2 Staples Road. Staples Road, not Staples Mill Road.
Oh, did I say Staples Mill?
Yeah.
I apologize.
That's okay. I thought you did that just for me. As you can see from the site plan, could you go back to the site plan, please? It's a single-family home. The yard is small to moderate compared to what's around it. And everything on the site flows in a northwesterly direction. On the eastern, I guess the northeastern side of the site, they've got a little bit more of a wooded buffer there between the actual yard and the little garden and the stream than they do over on the northwestern side. On that side, you've got a wetland area that it's actually part of a seep that comes out of the bottom of the slope that flows into the stream in that area. And I would imagine at times it will serve as kind of a floodplain area when the stream reaches a bankful stage. But that's the feature that the water is really trying to go to from the wooden deck and from the left side of the house. And so what we're seeing in that area is, I'd consider it moderate erosion. And talking with the applicants and the applicant's construction manager, they're saying that the biggest problem they have is they're having erosion under the deck with the deck footers and the velocities coming under the deck. They're going to address that as part of this. It'll all be under the deck. They may do some gravel. He's got to figure out what he's going to have to do under there. But the big thing is to reduce the velocity coming under there. And then once it gets to that grass, it really takes off and goes down the slope. And what you saw in the photo is the nicest that I've seen it in the couple times that I've been out there to take a look at it. One of the big problems they have with it that causes a lot of erosion is their lawn maintenance company takes equipment around there and it slides down the slope. So in constructing a 3 to 4 foot small wall in that area, it'll level that area out. You won't have the equipment sliding down the slope. You also will be able to slow the velocities of the water. They'll put some 57 stone in behind the wall. So on a normal storm event, you'll have infiltration of that water behind the wall, and you'll have weep holes at the bottom of it that'll allow it to come out at a much slower rate than it's coming down the hill now. As far as the patio goes, they wanted to do a fire pit, like a stone fire pit. And so that's not necessarily conducive to doing on a wooden deck. So we talked about doing a small patio. The original proposal was a little bit larger than this. We were able to get them down to 210 square feet. So basically 15 by 14. That would give them room for a stone fire pit, a small table, and a couple chairs. The mitigation is actually a little bit different than what you had put up there. They had proposed 11 shrubs instead of the canopy tree and 3 shrubs. Once you get into the rear portion of the yard, it's mature forest once you're beyond the clearing limits. So what they're planning on doing is putting some shrubs around the base of the retaining wall to stabilize the area there, and then also putting shrubs on the northern side of the proposed patio with a small area of mulch that connects all the shrubs in that area, that any of the runoff coming from the patio will have to go through that mulch and over the shrubs area. That'll help stabilize the soils there. And like Mr. Wilson stated, our total impervious of the site, new impervious area will be 240 square feet. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. You actually answered my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you guys for all coming out and having a board hearing. We greatly appreciate this. It helps keep everything moving in the county. I know he's shaking his head. He understands that. But as consultants, we greatly appreciate that. And as our applicants, they greatly appreciate it too. So thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Discussion from the board.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Roth's design has incorporated my concerns in providing some level of infiltration or at least stormwater treatment before it's discharged. So
Makes it pretty minimal. Okay, would someone like to make a motion?
a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board Case CBPA 20-0027 at 2 Staples Road.
Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson? Mr. Denton?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries, exception is granted. Next case is CBPA 20-0028, 105 Abigail Lane, another retaining wall.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson here to present case CBPA 20-0028 and 105 Abigail Lane, Ms. Amber Martins. Mr. Edward Podish of Edward Podish Custom Building has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Ms. Amber Martins for encroachments into the RPA buffer for construction of 2 retaining walls on property located at 105 Abigail Lane within the Kings Mill subdivision. Property is further identified as tax map parcel 503-04-00083. Parcel was platted in 1981 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay ordinance. Subject parcel here outlined in blue. Close up showing the property. There is a sanitary sewer line that runs on the southern property line. Topography as it affects this property. There is an existing deck on the back of the property, and the slope takes off fairly significant once you get to that deck down to the bottom of the ravine. RPA as it affects this property is approximately 74%. From the application, the 2 retaining walls are outlined here in yellow, the RPA in red. And then at the southern end or the bottom end of the first yellow retaining wall, there starts the JCSA easement. It's 10 foot on her property, 10 foot on the adjacent property. So the total lot size for this property is 0.43 acres, of which 74% is located within the RPA. The applicant is proposing the construction of 2 retaining walls equating to 137 square feet within the landward 50-foot RPA in order to address erosion issues that the owner has been experiencing. Staff has made 2 site visits with the applicant during 2019 to discuss the issue. The required mitigation for this amount of impervious surface equates to planting of 3 shrubs. Mitigation surety will be required in the amount of $250 acceptable to the county attorney's office. Staff's evaluated the exception request and has determined that the application should be heard before the board because the construction is, the retaining walls are accessory structures. The board may grant exceptions to Chapter 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. That granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming on related or adjacent parcels. That reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it does meet all 5 of those conditions as presented above and does recommend approval of the exception request. Should the board also find the exception request meets all 5 of those conditions, staff does suggest the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. The applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The planting of 3 shrubs. A surety of $250 in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the county attorney's office. That no portion of the retaining walls be within the JCSA easement. That the exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by May 13, 2021, and written requests for an extension to the exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 1st, 2021. Site photographs, the contractor was nice enough to flag the retaining wall in the field. The upper wall is shown here, running at the edge of the wood line. I believe those are pawpaws just to the right of the string line. And you can see some footers from the deck up in the upper left corner of this photo. Looking the other way, again, the string line is the location of the wall. This would be the second wall. The upper wall again. And up in the upper right-hand corner are those deck footers. And those footers have been exposed from erosion. About 6 to 10 inches of concrete footer has been exposed. And staff does recommend approval with the following conditions: all other necessary local, state, and federal permits as required, the planting of 3 shrubs, a surety of $250 to ensure the mitigation plantings, that no portion of the retaining walls be within the JCSA easement. The exception request shall become null and void if construction is not begun from 1 year from tonight, May 13, 2021, and if an extension request is required, that be made to our office no later than April 1st of 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
Any questions?
Mr. Wilson, again, I'll ask, can you evaluate the slope erosion, not so much the erosion that is occurring adjacent to the footers, but this series of retaining walls extending down the hillside, is there slope erosion on that hillside?
There is. It's hard to quantify because there's a lot of shrub and I would call it weed growth. There's vines and some greenbrier, if memory's correct, in that location. The steepness of the slope also precludes safely walking around the deck.
Well, I mean, could this protection of the footers be handled or accommodated through a retaining wall within the yard, similar to what was done on the last application?
I will defer to the applicant.
All right, questions for staff? Okay, this time I'll open the public hearing. Is the applicant present? You could state your name for the board.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Edward Potish. I represent Edward Potish Custom Builders here in the county, representing the Martins issue.
Okay, we have a question. Is there a way, to address this erosion without the 2 walls? Could you build something closer in the back of the yard? Why do we need 2 retaining walls here?
My philosophy is that the initial wall right behind the deck that jeopardizes the deck area, the principal problem, needs to be reinforced with grade behind it as well. I feel that the erosion is going to continue in a manner to jeopardize the wall that we put in now and the future if we don't build another wall and have the sediment come up to help us reinforce the upper wall. Now keep in mind, the wall is not a consistent height. It's only where, if you can go back to the picture where the walls are highlighted in green. Right there, if you notice kind of in the center of the walls, there's a slight angle where they change directions. That's the highest point of both walls because of the natural erosion that's taking place on the property. They basically go from that highest point, which would be about 36 inches, to almost nothing on both ends. So I hope I'm answering your question in regards to why I feel the second wall is necessary to reinforce the first wall.
I noticed there's quite an elevation drop between the two walls. How high is the second wall, the downhill wall?
How high is it? At its highest point, it won't exceed 36 inches. And that's just to let us get an even grade to reinforce, like I said, the upper wall.
Are you, how are you built, are these sheet pile or are they stone or?
These walls will be wood in nature, ground contact wood, 6x6 post in the ground, and they'll have 2x8 material on the backside to support the sediment. There will be kickers at the highest areas where necessary to help support the wall before the new sediment's put in place.
In the area between the walls, what is your proposed use for that area? Are they going to let it go back to natural or?
It's going to be natural. We plan on covering it with coarse mulch to help stabilize the sediment as well as the plantings to give the root structure, mitigate the.
My concern I have no concern with helping protect the deck structure from the erosion around the footings. My concern is destabilizing that slope even further and aggravating erosion.
I think if you can picture the only disturbance, I think, would be what's necessary to dig the post holes, and which would be necessary to go 3 feet, the depth of the holes, and then to get the vertical wall 2x8s underground, probably within 6 to 8 inches. All of that sediment would stay on the upper side of the wall that would be filled in with the sediment after the wall's built.
So you're not taking heavy equipment down the slope?
No, sir. The slope would never allow that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak on this issue? This time I'll close the public hearing. Discussion from the board.
With the fact that you don't have equipment, no disturbance, just going to be just foot travel is all in an auger drill in the hole. It's not going to be very high, 3 foot to 0.
Okay, can we have a motion?
All right, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0028 at 105 Abigail Lane.
Okay, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries, the exceptions granted. That concludes our public hearings, but we do have a number of board considerations. The first matter for the board to consider is an extension request for CBPA 19-0033.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Before you tonight is extension request for CBPA 19-0033, 221 Bircher Court. Mr. Scott Pito is requesting a 1-year extension to his exception request, which was originally granted on May 8th, 2019. Staff has administratively extended the approval from May 8th to May 13th so that the Chesapeake Bay Board could act on this request. Staff concurs with the request with the stipulation that all permit conditions except for the expiration date be reauthorized and the new date of expiration be May 13, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board has on this request.
No question.
Questions?
No. Let's see, do we need a formal motion on this?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Okay, someone want to make a motion?
Move to grant the extension request for CBPA -19 19-0033 at 221 Bircher Court.
Maybe we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, we have another extension request for CBPA 19-0035 at 106 Loxley Lane.
Evening, Mr. Chair. Before you tonight is extension request for CBPA 19-0035. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas and Heather Mundy are requesting a one-year extension to their exception request originally granted on May 8th, 2019. Staff has administratively extended the approval from May 8th to May 13th so that the Chesapeake Bay Board could act on this request. Staff concurs with the request with the stipulation that all permit conditions, except for the expiration date, be reauthorized, and the new date of expiration be May 13, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board has on this request.
Questions?
Someone like to, would a board member like to make a motion for this?
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the board vote to extend request CBPA 19-0035, 106 Loxley Lane.
We have a roll call, please?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. The extension is granted. We now have, next one is an appeal?
No, the next one is a mitigation
Oh,
revision.
mitigation revision, okay.
Before you tonight is a revision to an approved mitigation plan for CBPA 18-0138, formerly CBE 15-105, 108 Seven Oaks. Mr. Ronald Nervitt is requesting a modification to the mitigation plan approved with CBPA 18-0138. The exception request was granted on August 12, 2015, and a 1- and a 2-year extension were granted. The board approved the mitigation package, which included 18 planting units and a rain garden. The proposed mitigation plan includes 9 planting units. Factors in support of approval include the elimination of the approved swimming pool at 800 square feet of impervious cover, the planting of 35 ornamental grasses, the planting of 33 wetland grasses at the pond's edge, the planting of 1,100 square feet of liriope grass in a 10-foot perimeter along the pond edge, not planting any sod to the pond edge, and making a one-time payment of $2,000 into the James City County Chesapeake Bay Restoration Fund. The board must approve, reject, or modify with revisions as they are substantially different than what was approved. Again, Mr. Nervitt is requesting approval of a revised mitigation plan at 108 Seven Oaks. And on the left-hand side, we have the approved plan with 18 planting units and a rain garden. It also had a swimming pool with 800 square feet of impervious cover approved as well. The proposed plan on the right-hand side includes 9 planting units, elimination of the swimming pool, 1,100 square feet of liriope grass at the pond's edge, 33 ornamental and 35 wetland grasses, and then a $2,000 payment into the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Fund. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has on this request.
So what's the reduction in impervious surface here?
800 square feet, it does equate to 2 planting units. So from 16 planting units, what would be required? It would be 16.
And does the proposed plantings, are they equivalent to that, to 16 planting units?
That's an excellent question, Mr. Chair. It's one I've been struggling with. It is my opinion that the various grasses, while they don't count in a typical mitigation plan, that they are relatively equivalent to the missing planting units. I would also like to point out the $2,000 payment is approximately what it would cost to install the rain garden, in staff's opinion.
Mr. Wilson, it's a 6 feet in width or variable width. Is that, am I reading that correctly? On the proposed plan?
Where are you reading that?
The width of the, this
Oh, up at the
vegetated
top.
buffer?
It does say 6-foot width variable from the pond's edge. I was under the impression that it was going to be 10-foot minimum.
Is that a mulched bed?
I believe it is. There is no turf going down to the pond, so it would have to be mulched.
Is the backyard grassed currently?
Yes, it is currently stabilized. Mr. Nervitt did receive a certificate of occupancy on the house last month. He also was, he took advantage of the call-in option for this case, and if you don't mind, I would like to play his comments for the board.
Sure.
My name is Ronald Nervitt. My wife Lois and I live at 108 Seven Oaks, Williamsburg, Virginia, 23188. First, I want to apologize for us not attending the proceedings in person this evening. Both my wife and I are in the age group that is most at risk of the COVID-19 virus, and therefore didn't think it prudent to attend the session. We tried to be very careful concerning the virus. However, I do want to thank you for the opportunity to provide telephone comments to the Chesapeake Bay Board. CBB is what I'll refer to it in this message, concerning the mitigation proposal relative to our property located at 108 Seven Oaks, Ford's Colony. My wife Lois and I have been working on a number of iteration proposals and believe what has been submitted meets and exceeds the objectives of the CBB concerning mitigation. Our lot presented challenges to addressing the mitigation as originally planned. The setbacks from the water, the sewer easement, the steepness of the terrain on both sides of the house, the narrow passageway for access to the sides and back of the home for emergencies and maintenance are reasons for the number of iterations. Working with county staff, we believe we have achieved a mitigation plan that accommodates the constraints and also meets and exceeds the objectives that the CBB is looking for. The most important factor are measures taken to address the impervious runoff from home and driveway. Impervious runoff is the culprit that the CBB is attempting to minimize, and any steps taken should address this head on. We have done this in the building of our home. We have constructed rock beds, some large, some small, to capture the impervious runoff from the house proper as well as the driveway. What feeds the rock beds are a series of drain pipes surrounding the house that are routed to the beds prior to the water entering the lake. This was done at significant expense. We then created a boundary around the entire shoreline of ornamental grasses, wetland grasses, liriopy grasses, all intended to further capture runoff prior to flowing into the lake. Additionally, there are a large number of shrubs of various varieties and trees whose root structure will absorb runoff. Finally, the remaining property is sodded to prevent washing of the terrain into the lake. I should note that very large drain pipes, perhaps 2 to 3 feet in diameter, can be seen around the lake, directly bringing tons of impervious runoff from roads and subsections in and around Ford's Colony. We have done extensively more capturing from our small lot. We have not tried to minimize mitigation, but embrace it. Our attitude was to target the prime problems with runoff and make remedial measures more effective. We believe that we provided a mitigation plan that exceeds the objectives of the Chesapeake Bay Board. We therefore request approval of our plan. Thank you, and stay safe.
What are the wetlands grasses?
I don't recall exactly. I believe it was Juncus.
Mr. Wilson, in the phone call, he said that he worked with the staff and that the proposal that he has right now meets or exceeds the planting requirements. Agree with that statement?
It's not an easy statement to say, because what he has proposed doesn't equate to what our normal mitigation ratios are. Having said that, I believe what he has proposed, as he said, does meet the intent of the Chesapeake Bay.
Does meet the intent.
My opinion. That's a really difficult question because it's not an apples to apples comparison.
Mr. Wilson, Mr. Nervitt in his comments described rock infiltration or catch basins. Are you able to point those out here?
Yeah, they're not depicted very well in this plan, but the where it says no swimming pool and then it says sod off to the right of that, just at that corner of the house, there is a rock bed that comes down, directing water safely down the slope. And he is right. There is, in that small area, it must be 15 feet wide. There's 6 foot of elevation. So he has tried to convey safely water to the pond without eroding the ground. There was another area. I want to say it's off the. It's a little further down the page, off the graphics shown there. Comes from the driveway proper.
Well, I support the reestablishment of a continuous buffer on the shoreline or around the property edge. So I'm generally in support of this proposal.
There is, just in case it's not evident, there is a 20-foot JCSA easement between the house and the lake that Mr. Nervitt has to contend with, as do every property owner around that lake. Just want to point that out. There is no large-scale canopy trees that could be planted in that area. It affect his plan.
Any other questions for the staff?
I think that Trevor made a comment a couple times, and I agree with him entirely. The drainage from outside areas that dump into that pond is much, much, much more significant than anything would be property. I really think that's just a glorified sediment basin anyway. It's really, to me, it's not a pond, not anything that, would carry a definition of a true natural area. And I don't mean to be talking down about their pond, but it's just that what I see him doing here is nothing compared to the water that comes into it from other areas. That would be my position on something.
Mr. Wilson, that is a BMP, is it not?
It is classified as a BMP. It was
Designed to treat.
It was designed to treat stormwater. It was built with the construction of the golf course.
Any other discussion from the board? Would someone like to make a motion?
Move that we grant the mitigation revision requested for CBPA 18-0138 at 108 Seven Oaks.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries, the revision is granted. We now have an appeal in front of us.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Before you tonight is an appeal of plan denial for Franciscus Homes at the Promenade of John Tyler. Mr. Graham Corson of AES Engineers has filed an appeal to the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board on February 24th, 2020. He's appealing on behalf of Franciscus Homes, the developer. The administrative decision to deny an erosion and sediment control plan because the requirements outlined in sections 23-9 of the James City County Code have not been met. Some background information for the board. In September 2019, an amendment to the Promenade at John Tyler project was submitted by AES for review and approval to the county. The site is a residential development encompassing duplex units, 10-plex units, a clubhouse, park space, and a stormwater conveyance system to a BMP that is behind the Riverside Medical building. In January 2020, an erosion and sediment control plan was then submitted by AES to deal with an excess of soil material from the September amendment. The erosion sediment control plan proposes to stockpile soil on a commercial outparcel shown on the master plan for the Promenade at John Tyler, adjacent to the former Zaxby's restaurant. Existing site conditions consist of a fallow field. In the James City County Code, section 23-9, Chesapeake Bay Preservation, it states that the performance standards establish the means to minimize erosion and sedimentation potential and maximize rainwater infiltration. It achieves this through the general performance standards in the code. In sections 23-9B1, land disturbance shall be limited to the area necessary to provide for the proposed use or development. It is staff's contention that no plan of development has been proposed. Stormwater management for the site is provided by the same best management practices that handle the Promenade at John Tyler development. A typical stockpile plan, like the one proposed for this project, has a mound of soil upon a relatively flat area. Staff guidance and recommendations. Staff has reviewed the appeal and associated documents and it offers the following information for the board's consideration. The commercial parcel is shown on the master plan for the Promenade at John Tyler. The residential portion of the Promenade at John Tyler development needs to dispose of excess soil. Ms. Deirdre Wells, via email on January 28th, 2020, denied the erosion and sediment control plan because there is no proposed use for the commercial parcel. Section 23-17B of the ordinance gives guidance to the board and states, in rendering its decision, the board shall balance the hardship to the property owner with the purpose, intent, and objectives of this chapter. The board shall not decide in favor of the appellant unless it finds that the hardship is not generally shared by other properties in the vicinity. The Chesapeake Bay, its tributaries, and other properties in the vicinity will not be adversely affected. The appellant acquired the property in good faith, and the hardship is not self-inflicted. Staff's guidance to the board on deciding this matter is as follows. The hardship is shared by other properties within the Promenade of John Tyler development. The hardship is defined as not having a proposed use. Granting of the appeal in this case will not adversely affect the Chesapeake Bay, its tributaries, and other properties in the vicinity. And the appellant acquired the property in good faith, but the hardship is self-inflicted. The developer has an approved master plan for both the residential and commercial parcels on the property. So they're appealing the denial of the erosion sediment control plan, which would allow for a stockpile on the commercial out parcel at the Promenade of John Tyler. Master plan amendment that was submitted and approved by the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. The amendment itself was for the lower left-hand corner. There was a 10-plex proposed on that commercial out parcel, and it needed to get approval from the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. The commercial parcel that is in question is at the upper portion, upper right-hand corner of the project. Zaxby's restaurant is immediately north of that. This is the commercial out parcel where the stockpile is proposed. This is from the master plan. And this is the erosion sediment control plan that was submitted. And that's the same parcel showing limits of disturbance around the building pad and then a temporary topsoil stockpile area within the middle of that. They are grading ditches on both sides and installing a culvert pipe to safely contain or convey stormwater runoff from the project into the existing conveyance system, and it doesn't overwash the entrance road into the project. From the ordinance, Sections 23-9, General Performance Standards, and disturbance shall be limited to the area necessary to provide for the proposed use or development. Staff's contention is there has not been a proposed use for that commercial parcel. Pictures from the site taken this morning. On the left-hand picture, the structure in the background is the Zaxby's restaurant. Right-hand photograph, that's the approximate location in the middle of that field of the stockpile area. Again, staff guidance. The hardship's not generally shared by other properties in the vicinity. Chesapeake Bay, its tributaries, and other properties in the vicinity will not be adversely affected. And the appellant acquired the property in good faith, and the hardship is, actually I should say, hardship is self-inflicted. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Graham Corson of AES is here, and while this is not a public hearing, it is staff's recommendation that he be allowed to speak on behalf of his client.
So I just want to make sure I understand this issue in front of us. You're not asking us, it's not about the adequacy of how they're going to, keep the soil pile. It's just over the fact that there has to, according to the ordinance, there has to be a proposed use before you can approve it, and you feel that there is no proposed use, so therefore, regardless of how they're proposing to do it is not the issue. It's just this.
Correct.
It's just this article. They haven't proposed how they're going to use it. what it'll be used for. Okay. Any questions?
Well, so I'm a little slow, I apologize, but if you go back to the land development plan or the master plan, that parcel is part of the master plan, correct? And what are they, is what I'm looking at in that, on that parcel a representative footprint for a building or some other structure?
The wavy line?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So the staff does not consider that an approved plan?
We did not.
Thank you.
If it's, has it been approved?
Master plan? Yes, sir.
So those building areas that show on there have been approved, but wasn't it taken into consideration, is what you're saying, maybe?
We did not feel that was a adequate plan of development.
Because it's just like a square footage. It's not saying, here's a building, a specific building. It's just, hey, here's a box that we say.
Here's a box, correct, here's a box, here's some parking. There were no calculations or for stormwater or anything of that nature from a typical site development standpoint submitted for this parcel outside of the erosion sediment control plan that was.
Would future building proposed for that site be required to meet the standards that you're talking about, other standards that would be needed to be met? Hold on that?
Yes, sir.
They would kick in, not just passing this and leaving it open to do whatever you want to do.
Correct, they would have to follow the master plan. If
Still-
they deviated
still
from the
would have to
master
do
plan,
that.
it would have to go back before the planning commission and the board of supervisors.
Did their master plan include a conceptual stormwater plan?
That's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. I would defer that to Mr. Corson.
Okay, could you come forward and
I just have one,
let's hear your side
one
of
point of
this?
clarification for Mr. Wilson. So you stated that you ran through the three criteria, but could you go back this line for? I just wanted to make sure that I understood that you're saying that that's the guidance from the section, but the staff found that there was hardship for number one, and that for number three, that it was self-inflicted. Is that correct?
That's correct. That slide is incorrect.
Okay. That's showing the section, what the section outlines, and then
Correct.
10. Thank you.
My name is Graham Corson with AES. To give a little background about why we put this plan together, like Mike said, we are doing a site plan amendment where we're adding a 10-plex to the promenade, and we have an excess of material. So per the master plan, we are showing that as a commercial parcel with a building planned there. The existing topography right now has that area about 3 feet below the roadway right next to it. So when that commercial parcel is developed, we will have to bring in material and bring it up to a level that works with the roadway. So the plan was put together so that they wouldn't have to export the material from the 10-plex amendment off-site somewhere and then have to bring it back in. So it's called a stockpile plan, but that may be a misnomer because it's not going to be a pile of material. It's basically bringing up to a level that the building would be sitting at. So while we don't have an approved site plan for that, we do have an approved master plan that doesn't show a specific use besides commercial, but we would consider that still a use. Also, I would say that when the promenade plan was put together and the BMP was studied for this, Those commercial parcels were included in that and considered fully developed for that BMP design.
How long do you envision that the soil would be sitting there until you submit a plan?
I cannot specifically answer that. I don't know the schedule for that, but I will say that if the plan is put into place, it would be seeded and stabilized, and it would just be basically turned back into a field until the time came where they did develop it into a.
What you're saying is that you're gonna bring that low area back up to grade with the excess material that's being used, hauled from another location on site on that property.
That's correct.
To save hauling it in at a later date and incurring the cost of that extra material. But you needed a place to put it anyway instead of hauling it off to somewhere else.
Yes, sir. That was the idea, was that we wouldn't have to bring it off-site somewhere and then have to bring it right back from off-site onto the site.
That
when they do.
explains it.
Other questions?
I understand, you to say that ditching, drainage areas have been established for the stockpile now? That's part of the plan? Okay. But they're not in place, but they will be in place as the soil is stockpiled?
Yes, sir. If I'm understanding your question correctly, they will be, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they will be installing pipe at the front of the property, installing swales on either side to collect the stormwater from the project site or the stockpile site and convey it safely to the rest of the drainage network for the project.
That is correct. And I will also add that storm pipe was set up where it is to work with that future commercial building location. They wouldn't have to tear it out when they do develop it. They can connect into it with any kind of parking lot or roadways that would go to the site.
You feel comfortable that no erosion will take place? With the plan that they have with the piping, do you feel comfortable with it, that no erosion will take place?
Yes, once everything's properly stabilized.
Is this gonna be a level area, or are you talking about a stockpile?
No, it would be level. It's almost like the same
So you're
grade
actually
as the
filling
road
in
itself.
level up, not a stockpile is what
Correct,
you're.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so right now it's actually in a depression. If you can see kind of a slope going down on the top of this display, and that's kind of where the road level would be. It matches that back area elevation. So it's just taking that material from the Tinplex plan and pulling this building pad up to what elevation it would be at eventually.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. I don't see any environmental impact from this.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think the staff's position with respect to this project was that it wasn't under an approved plan of development, if I'm not mistaken. And in my opinion, I understand their reasoning for stating that, but I would equate this master plan, considering that it had an approved, or at least a conceptual drainage plan and treatment plan with it, to be an approved plan of development. So I'm inclined to support the request for the appeal.
Also, I don't know, pulling all the dirt off-site and then hauling it back, there's always impacts with, moving that amount of soil, no matter how careful you are.
If we approve it, what's to prevent them from stockpiling? Is there a way, can we put something into the appeal that just says, hey, you can bring it up to level and that's no more, that way it doesn't become
Well, they may want to surcharge a little bit if you're putting that much fill, so I would be careful about doing that.
You've got your truck traffic and on the roads and VDOT, all of that is involved with that too. Which you keep it on the property and not create a problem, bring it up to grade, and they're not stockpiling. I don't really consider that as stockpiling personally.
Wilson, you have anything to add?
I just want to address Mr.
Okay.
Dunn's concern. If they deviate, should the board grant the appeal, they go forward with the erosion sediment control plan as proposed, if they deviate from that, they can't deviate from that, because it'll then be, once we approve it, that'll be the plan of development for that. we'll have sureties in place to protect the county's interest, to make sure that that plan has been followed and properly stabilized. That, oh,
Thank you.
Okay. Somebody want to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we grant the appeal for the Promenade as presented.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
I'm going to vote yes, but I'm reluctant to vote against the staff. I don't like doing this, but I'm going to vote yes because of Mr. Gussman's comment that there is no environmental degradation taking place, and I believe that to be true. I'm voting yes.
And Mr. Dunn?
Yes, I have the similar concerns as Mr. Apperson, but I vote yes.
We'll state in the minutes, please, with the comments that I made just now about the vote. Thank you very much.
Okay, motion carries, the appeal is granted. Our last matter of board consideration is a remote participation policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you don't mind, I'll stay seated over here. This is the same remote participation policy that the Wetlands Board adopted. This policy conforms with FOIA requirements and would allow a board member to participate remotely in the event of a personal reason or a temporary disability or medical condition. And this policy will remain in effect and available to the board beyond the end of this current pandemic. Staff recommends approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Can we have a motion to adopt the participation policy?
So moved?
Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay.
one more thing, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I would like to formally introduce Mr. Michael O'Brien to the Chesapeake Bay Board, just in case they are separate televised meetings.
Okay.
So,
Welcome
Yeah,
again.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, could I say one thing too, please?
Sure.
A fellow board member here expressed to me before the meeting, serious surgery is taking place, and we may not see him for quite a while. I want to wish Mr. Waltrip the best. Godspeed, good luck, and our prayers are with you, sir. That's all, sir.
Okay, no matters of special privilege. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Move.
Okay, we are adjourned.